Welcome everybody to episode 2 of the Playing Field with 3 of our regular guests over in NZ. So we've got Jose Manuel Figueira, who's joined us again, Mr. Scott Hales, and Paul Temple. So first of all, just want to welcome everybody back, and I hope everybody's really good. We had some really good feedback last week from the first episode, so thank you to all of those listeners who tuned in, and a number of you who also sent some message of best wishes, and that's really good and a really good start, and we'll continue to give as much as we can. And certainly the 3 guys here are keen to make sure that they can keep giving and giving some insight into both their teams and also the league that they played in this year. This week, we're going to talk a bit more around player management. So we started to talk a little bit around that towards the end of the episode last week, and the guys have gone away and put some particular thoughts into some areas around player management, which people are going to share with you. So just to kick us off, before we get into that, I just want to get the guys to say hello and maybe just give us a bit of an insight into some of the activities that you've been giving your teams during the hiatus to keep them fit and engaged. I don't know if Jose, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, well, first of all, hello, Steve. Again, thanks for inviting us back on. So good to be able to talk football amongst this stoppage of not being out in the grass. So yeah, thanks for that. In terms of ourselves, obviously, while the domestic season has of course finished, we're kind of waiting tentatively from OFC to find out when our quarter-final game will be played. So for us, while we're of course following all the isolation protocols and on firm lockdown, the boys are busy following their programs, and we've hit that on a 3-prong approach. So as usual, they've got their individual programs from a physical perspective that they're able to do both at home, and obviously here in NZ we're lucky enough to be able to go outside and exercise. So they're doing that on an individual basis. From a tactical perspective, we've run a couple of sort of team live workshops online. So we use the Huddle platform, which I'm sure everyone is well aware of. We've been using that for the season, and while we've been going through some of our playing concepts as a group, the players have also kind of gone away and done a little bit of homework, so to speak, on some specific areas and things that we want to keep evolving. And this week we'll be starting a mindfulness and well-being workshop. So that's not live as a group. So that's something that's getting sent out to the team, but it's something that they can choose to do individually and follow. So it's kind of like a 6-part introduction into meditation, being stillness, having clear thinking. So while we're at home, we're obviously trying to keep them as busy as possible, really.
Nice. And Scott, down in Wellington, what are some of the things that some of the Team Wellington guys are doing? Are they keeping fit, keeping active, and keeping busy?
Yeah, I guess we're in a completely different scenario to Jose up in Auckland, and obviously with Paul at the Phoenix, where they've still got the same group of players that they're potentially working with for the foreseeable future, as in they've still got competitions that are just around the corner. Regarding Team Wellington, we don't have any further competition. So all we've been doing is, we're fully aware that some clubs within the Wellington region don't have, the expertise that Team Wellington have within its staff. So just for the stopgap, our sports scientist James has been sending out just reminders and a program around how they can keep themselves active, obviously staying within you know, the restrictions of what the government are telling us all to do. So James is keeping on top of that. That's more of a just something from Team Wellington for the players who are going to go and play in the local competition in the Central League, and if players are going to go and, you know, play in the Northern League if they've gone home or wherever they are, then we're offering them a form of program to keep them moving. And obviously attached to that message is, although we finished, thank you, we've still got a review to do, but make sure that if you do need to talk to someone or you do need help in any other way, then make sure that you reach out to any of us as staff. We're always here for you, even though that our season came to an abrupt end. So that's really where we're at Team Wellington. So a little bit going on, but not like Paul or Jose.
Yeah. And Paul, obviously, there's the A-League hiatus at the moment also. You know, certainly for the men's first team puts a pause on that. With the academy, is there any kind of continuing activity, and what are you doing to get some of the younger players like through that period of time?
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit different dealing with the younger players. The message is very much being to try and take some time, stay at home, be with your family, be good kids, cook dinner, help out around the house, and do some things that are good life skills. But I guess I've been fortunate in a way because I've got really good staff at the academy, so they've taken some ownership on some programs. So my sports scientist has really sent out all of the information to the boys in terms of the keeping fit side of things and programs for them, so that when we do come back to training, hopefully they haven't lost too much of their football fitness. And then the other coaches in the academy have taken some ownership on some tasks. So we've basically split our academy groups up into position specific across all of the age groups. So, for example, all the fullbacks have been put into a group on Huddle, onto a WhatsApp group. And so we have some reserve team fullbacks, and then under 17s, under 16s, under 15s, and they're all working together. And we're sending out a weekly challenge. So that might be a skill challenge or a life challenge, and they have to do it as a team. So they have to kind of connect together, and then they've got some analysis tasks on Huddle in their positions that are position specific for them to analyze. So there's different tasks for them to do there, as well as us finishing off our reviews from the ISPS Handa Premiership. And then our expectation is that when we do get back together, we'll go straight into a Central League campaign together. So for me personally, it's just about staying connected with the boss and the playing style and any kind of alterations that he's looking at there, and just kind of trying to implement those into the program so that when the boys get back, we're on top of things and ready to go.
Nice. So it certainly sounds like everybody's keeping busy and doing their bit to make sure that, you know, obviously you keep connected with your players and your coaches. So yeah, some really good ideas, and maybe some ideas there for those that are tuning in and listening. So we're going to talk primarily for the next 40 minutes or so today, as I said, on managing players. New Zealand's quite a unique place in which there's a lot of overseas players that come and play. There's a scattering of professional players, both current and former. And obviously there's a very close link between the ISPS Premiership and the national team. So there's a lot of players. So we're just going to spend a bit of time talking about some of those different areas, and again, getting some insight from the coaches on how they dealt with that. And yeah, hopefully there'll be some good little hints and tips for people. We'll start off with you, Paul. I guess it doesn't necessarily occur as much right now, given that the context you're in, but in terms of any overseas players that you get over into Wellington Phoenix, what are some of the really important things, I guess, to make those transitions from overseas into New Zealand a success?
It's really first team. We don't often get overseas players into the academy. We've had one or two. Last season we had Gianni Stensness and Taji Kumsas come over from Australia, and Gianni's obviously now gone on back to play for the Mariners. So we kind of had to had to kind of engage with 2 overseas players last year, which is a bit of a rarity. It's mainly the first team that deal with the players that are coming in from overseas, and we're lucky we've got a pretty experienced operations department at the club that deal with that. So it's really just about settling them into Wellington, giving them, I guess, all the information that they need if they've got families, where the kids might go to school, good places to live, access to all the local facilities, and getting around Wellington. It's a real family club, so I think everybody pitches in, and we've got some people that have been at the club for a number of years, so there's a real kind of homely feel to the place. My experience over the last few years of the players that come from overseas into the Phoenix is a really positive one. I think a lot of people love New Zealand and love living in Wellington, especially the English guys. You know, they come from kind of cold, wet, dreary places in England, and then they turn up in Wellington in the summer, and it's pretty nice place to live. So I think they're really enjoying it, and their families. But yeah, I think they all just chip in and help each other, really. And it's interesting because I think domestically in our national kind of Premier Leagues across the country, plus the National League itself, there's quite a variation of how clubs deal with their imports, so to speak, and the players that come in. I'd be interested to kind of know a little bit more about what Auckland do, because there's kind of a bit of a tradition there, isn't there, that players have come over from Spain initially because of Ramon and have stayed for a number of years. Like you've got guys like Belanga that's played for 7, 8 seasons maybe, I'm just guessing, but you know, like those are the sort of success stories where you have some players that really improve the game here in New Zealand and help the culture, and then you've got the other side of things where players last a few months and go back home for varying reasons. So it's a pretty transient football market. I think a lot of players come and go. A lot of it is down to the lifestyle, I think, of living in New Zealand and wanting to come to New Zealand, and then they decide whether or not the football's quite up to the standard that they want to keep playing at, or whether they want to kind of make a life for themselves here. So I think you kind of got to look at it 2 ways. There's the short-term contracts, and then there's the ones that you kind of want to keep here and stay here for a long period of time, you know.
So Jose, with that then, what would be some of the, I guess, the success stories, you know, maybe not necessarily just at Auckland City, but just of players that have come into the domestic leagues and have made a significant impact? And, how have they made such a good impact? What do you think are the reasons behind that?
I think probably a common, without going into some names at the moment, I think a common theme would be, you know, all of these guys are coming over probably initially for the lifestyle, the quality of life here in New Zealand. Probably in the first instance, a lot of these players are maybe playing, you know, very much lower league football, whether it be, you know, in England in maybe Conference South or National League, you know, Spain, anywhere else in those lower leagues where, you know, the football is not quite, you know, at that professional level. And I guess whilst, you know, we are an amateur football league here in New Zealand, you know, these players are able to come over, you know, play football, invest in the local community. Most of the clubs have got obviously great setups, whether it be with the federations or schools, clubs in their areas to, you know, provide some you know, some coaching and support in the local area. And you find, you know, it's no coincidence that, you know, guys that have been here for a number of years, you know, now either have you know, families, you know, they're married, they're very much invested in the country and in their local community. And, you know, to think off the top of my head, obviously, you know, Auckland, someone that came back after a couple of years, you know, Emiliano Tade, who's obviously, you know, initially came to Wellington for exactly that reason, played a season in the Central League, played a season for Team Wellington, and then, you know, made a move up a number of years ago now to Auckland. And, you know, while he made the step up for a couple of years into the professional game, you know, now towards the end of his career is lured back for, you know, for all of those reasons. So, I look around the other teams, probably someone, obviously like Bill Robertson, who, has played for, he's played for Waitakere, for Team Wellington, Hawke's Bay, Christchurch, I think originally as well, and Napier, obviously, when they were, in the National League as well. And, it's those types of guys that, obviously, provide a lot of value, as Paul said, in terms of the level of the league, but also guys that, invest in the culture in the football community, and as we've seen this year, raise the level, raise the level of the competition.
And Scott, I guess on the flip side, are there any, challenges or disadvantages sometimes with players from overseas coming into domestic leagues, or do you see it predominantly as being a good thing for the game generally and the standard of competition in the ISPS Premier?
I think it's good because they do raise the bar, they do raise the level. I think the biggest thing, my learnings this season, were obviously the situation between Auckland City, Team Wellington, and the difference with the Phoenix is we are amateur clubs. The Phoenix are a professional club, so the biggest thing for me was make sure that you tell the player the truth, because they're going to come to. Predominantly the players that I brought over were from the other side of the world. So as much as what, we can hide behind a few things, it is a long way away from England. It is a long way away from Ireland or Montenegro. So we've got to bear that in mind when we are recruiting these players, that, we do actually have the best interest for them as players at heart. And also on the flip side, if they're good players, then obviously, you want them to succeed at your club. So that was the biggest thing for me, making sure that they were aware of the league they were going in. I do think that the league is stronger than what some players who do come overseas think it is. I think that was one of my biggest messages. Like, don't just turn up to a game because you've played at a very good level back in your homeland, that New Zealand isn't going to give you what you need. But the lifestyle is something that a lot of players look for as well. And I think that the interesting part is when the Australian League does kick in certain times, and it does take away the quality of player that we have had in the country. So they do come over, they do add value, the foreign players. I think that the league needs some variety of player. It adds different scenarios to your group. It adds different elements to your trainings, where some players have been used to certain types of coaches, whereas I do feel that a lot of players over in New Zealand are used to a certain type of coach as well. And I think that some who have come from fierce backgrounds, where it was war and your teammate you're at war with, and then they come into your training, it adds a different dynamic to the group, and it helps other players in New Zealand who have only played on this shore that it is fierce if you want to make it to the next level as well. So I took the question as in really around making sure that the player is fully aware, and as a club we are fully aware of where they're coming from and what they've done, and they're aware of where they're coming to and what your goals are as a club and as a team, to make sure that you're synced, rather than they expect something that you can't offer them because you are an amateur club. So first and foremost is making sure that they're aware of where they're coming, and you're aware of where they're coming from, so you can match up.
I think we got to be a little bit careful as well in New Zealand, because I think like these guys are operating at a level where their recruitment is obviously very well thought out, and they're trying to get players in specific positions to improve the team and think more about the longer term, and can offer different competitions. But as a league, I think there are a few negative examples where foreign players are brought in when really they're no better than the local players or the local young players. And I think as a league, we've got to be really cautious that we don't just bring in players just because of a CV or it's a name, or coaches get a bit desperate because they need somebody quickly. I think as a whole, it would be better if the investment was in the youth and the local young players to give them an opportunity, and then the foreign players can add value as imports. And I think as long as coaches, we're aware of that. And I think stage of life as well is really important, because if you're coming here as a young aspiring footballer and you are good, the likelihood is you're going to move pretty quickly on, and there is that transient nature to it. Whereas if you're a little bit more experienced player, probably played a number of years in the lower leagues in Europe, and you're kind of looking for a lifestyle change, and maybe you have a family or a partner, you're coming to New Zealand, those type of players are more likely to stay for the longer term and then give back to the game. So Jose's mentioned like Bill, for example, and what he gives back to the game in his region, and there's loads of other examples around the league of players like that. Those are the ones that are adding real value. And if you've got a good setup where they can go and get into the community and engage with the kids around the club and stuff as well, I think that's where the import players into the league can add real value.
Yeah, don't want to turn it into too much of a debate around that. And I agree with a lot of what Paul just said. You know, where we need to give youth and younger players and Kiwi players a go. But like my job's on whether I win or lose. And that's the reality of my job. My job isn't to develop players to play for Team Wellington. My job at Team Wellington is to win the league, get to O-League, win O-League, go to the Club World Cup, win games at the Club World Cup. So we're more sustainable. I guess, you know, the examples out there are a lot of good examples out there where, you know, players have come over from overseas and done really well and have given back to the region. And, you know, I'm not going to get into another debate on the amateur agreement isn't worth the paper it's written on, because they can just walk away from it within 4 weeks. So maybe there could be something around that we could hold players in and say, hey, you know, or, you know, just thinking, speaking out loud, that it's all well and good giving younger players a go, but a little bit old school, like they've got to be ready and they've got to earn their stripes. And, you know, there's good examples out there where, you know, Team Wellington had Marco, and Marco Stamenic was a, you know, bright young player and has gone off, and he left the club and went and trialled overseas. But we just need to be really careful that we don't give young players the opportunity if they're not good enough, but just because they're Kiwi and young, we should. I think that's probably the bit where, you know, for me and my job, I just want to get away with it with my board. They'd just chop me off before I could speak. So
I think on that, Scott, or to touch on a bit further, is, you know, we're probably all similar aligned in terms of our thinking. But, you know, I know, see, coming back to Auckland, and I'm thinking, you know, next year and the next years, you know, the idea and the first thought is, in my recruitment, to look locally, you know, and I think it obviously makes sense to, you know, obviously we've got the regional leagues, we've got, you know, whether it be academies or whatever, but, you know, I think certainly, you know, there is an eye on, you know, looking at the local player first. You know, I think it makes obviously, you know, absolute sense. And then, you know, both from, yeah, obviously a connection perspective, but then a financial perspective as well. But exactly like you said, you know, we're, you know, probably in positions and clubs where, you know, you've got to make sure that you're winning, and that's that constant, you know, battle or personal battle as a coach of, you know, well, do you go with someone that's more experienced, or, you know, someone that's maybe the next big thing? So that's the beauty of coaching.
Yeah, like the rule of thumb that I always go with was, if they're good enough, they're old enough.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah.
So from this then, I think it's a good discussion point. So in your squads, you've both got players who have either previously played professional, or, you know, and have come, you know, across, if you like, to the ISPS Premiership, or you've got players that, I'm assuming, given the level, are aspiring to be professional, and then you've probably got a group that's in between. How do you as coaches kind of change your styles to cater for, you know, the ex-professional, you know, true professional players, and then the young aspiring professional players? Because I imagine you've all got those in your squads? Like, maybe talk us through some of the challenges that you might have with dealing with players at both ends of that spectrum. Maybe Jose, I mean, you've got that this year with a few of the players are there. You know, how are you dealing with that?
Yeah, I think that firstly, those, first and foremost, I think the players, want to be at Auckland City or Team Wellington or Eastern Suburbs because they want to, win things. They want to try and progress their careers. They want to try and obviously experience things that, whether, if they've come from overseas or are local, for example, obviously the opportunity to play at a Club World Cup, guys that are maybe day-to-day landscapers or working behind a desk, those opportunities. So I think firstly, regardless of the stage of their career, I think they're at, I'm speaking for Auckland, they're at Auckland because, of the, the quality of the environment, hopefully the quality of the training. If they have aspirations to be professional, obviously there's been a track record of that. Every year players are making a step up from Auckland, all over the world. And if they're not, if they're at a stage of their life where, look, I'm going to be in New Zealand, I'm seeing, that out the last few years of my career. So maybe someone like Albert, who, played a handful of games for us, but he's obviously, already well down the track of, well, look, I'm going to be living in New Zealand. I've started my coaching journey. He works within the club. And I guess there's a continuum of that side of things in terms of, players and what stages they're at. So yeah, I think I go back, I think regardless of the stage of a player, I think if they're serious about their football, they enjoy playing football a certain way, then look, I think, they're naturally drawn to teams and clubs and environments that kind of exude that on the pitch. So yeah, that's where I kind of fall on it, really, in a shortened answer.
And Scott, have you experienced that this year with the squad that you had? I mean, did you have a couple of players that fit into those two camps, if you like?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously recruited like Rory. Rory had played a lot of games in the top leagues in Scotland, and Ollie Bassett he made his debut when he was really young at Yeovil, and he'd flipped about a little bit, and same as like Justin Gully as well, who'd featured a couple of times for the Phoenix at different times over the last few years. So it's exactly the same as Jose, really, with these players that come in. Like their main focus is that they want to play football because they enjoy playing football. So some of them just look at it and see it as a different part of the world to play in. Some of them see it as they want to play football because the reason why they're probably not playing professionally now is because they didn't get the opportunities or the minutes that they wanted to. So, they play for their local franchise or regional federation club or whatever it is because they want to play football. So managing them and things like that is just normal because it's football. And some of them, they only know football as in turn up, train, go home. Whereas, especially with obviously Justin Gully and Ollie Bassett and Rory, as well as a few of the other boys that have moved into Wellington from outside areas that aren't in Wellington, they've actually got a trade with them as well, and they're on building sites at 7 a.m. and finish at 5:30 p.m. and then I'm expecting them through the door at 6 p.m. because we've got an analysis session, and they're just they're dragging themselves from one place to another, and they're covered in dust, and then we're being fierce with them at training because we want them to train full tip and 100%. And to be honest, those players who have been in those environments have found it difficult to start off with, but the main reason is that they're here because they want to play football, and you still get that huge element from them, that they're 100% committed to Team Wellington. They're 100% committed to the journey that you're on as a group, and the camaraderie in the changing rooms is something that, look, I know we've all played, and it's the biggest thing that we miss when we're a player is the changing room camaraderie. So making sure that the environment still fulfills what they need, but football's always the constant and it'll always be there. It's just how we manipulate or adapt the situation so we get the best out of the players that are working in ways that potentially they haven't worked in before.
And Paul, again, I mean, you've got a same scenario, but again, different context. You've got pro players around the club. You mentioned last week, obviously there's a bit of a mix between the pro players and the reserve team players and the academy players. How do you manage either the pro players coming down, if you like, or having to deal with different aspects of the playing staff?
Yeah, it's probably the most challenging part of the job in the summer is managing the academy players that are aspiring to be pros, and they're all young, and then managing the pros that come down from the A-League team to play in the Premiership. So I've learned a lot over the last few years on, I guess, how to do that more effectively. I think there's different categories for the pro players that come down from the A-League. You get some that literally are going to be there for one game, and they know that it's about getting minutes. They might be suspended or coming back from injury, and I'm just helping them to get back in, like, ready for the A-League team. And so that's a pretty easy situation to manage. I just got to try and make them feel comfortable. And obviously the young players then kind of try and learn from them as much as possible while they're in the dressing room and when they're in the team. And then you have a slightly more challenging scenario where some of the pros that are maybe a bit younger in the A-League squad that don't get regular games, and I see them a little bit more often, and it's about kind of, I guess, understanding that they don't really want to be in my team, like they want to be in the A-League team, but there's a process that they need to go through to get there, and a lot of that is form and getting more minutes and getting more games, and so you've kind of got to manage them in terms of expectations. I've got to say, all the professional players that have come down from the A-League team in the last few seasons particularly have been first class with their attitude when they're in the environment, so I've never had any issues with them. I guess I've just learned to be a little bit more myself. You're trying to kind of, I guess originally you're trying to impress with your environment's good and professional and you can help them and stuff, and then you sort of get to realize that it's thinking of them more as people rather than as footballers, and you're just trying to connect on a more human level and just sort of, I know what situation they're in. We've all been there before as players where you want to be in the top team, you want to be in the first team, and be playing every week in the stadium, on TV, and so you just got to kind of know what the situation is and understand. But then the flip side of it is I've got to hold them accountable to standards as well, and if we haven't really had a situation where I've had to really do this, but if they were to really underperform or kind of not have the right attitude, then I would have to hold them accountable to make sure that they stick to that professional nature of it. So far, so good in that aspect. They're already professional. And then I guess the last part of managing that situation is the young players that are in the team, and then they get moved out of the team because a professional player steps down for that week in their position, and that's a really difficult thing to understand as a young player. They know the situation, so there's never any arguments, but it's hard when maybe you've had 2 or 3 games, you played really well, you maybe even scored, assisted, like you're on good form, and then all of a sudden someone in your position drops down, you've got to go out the team. And so that's a really interesting dynamic to manage, and it's good for them because that's sometimes what it's like in professional football when they get into first team environments. The coach might choose to make a change for different reasons, and they just got to accept it and be ready to do things when they come on as a sub or play the following week. So I find the summer season managing the pros and the aspiring pros are really, really challenging from a coaching point of view, but really interesting as well because everyone's so different, and I really enjoy it. And I think it's a really unique situation, obviously in New Zealand, and it's probably just as difficult for opposition coaches like these guys when they play us, because they never know what's coming or who's going to be in the team. And yeah, it's always interesting when you see the opposition turn up and they're kind of looking down the tunnel to see which players are wearing the yellow tracksuits or which ones are wearing the black ones, and who's playing and who's not. And it's yeah, it's always
there was 8 against us, mate. 8.
yeah, you got the short straw this year, didn't you? So yeah, it's difficult. But it's interesting what Scott says about that we played Team Wellington twice this year with 8 professional players in the team, and that is a really interesting dynamic, because it goes from being most weeks, say I have 2, 3, maybe 4 at a push, but mainly 2. That's like
0 against Jose at the stadium, I think.
Yeah, 0 some weeks. So you kind of have an academy team with some pros, and then you have the scenario we had with Scott this year, which was basically it's a pro team with some academy players, and that's a massive shift in your dressing room from kind of having 2 or 3 that blend in to having the majority of them as being professionals. And so that was a new challenge this year, to experience that and to kind of totally shift your dressing room dynamic from week to week, like we had to with Team Wellington. And it's not always as easy as saying, oh, you've got 8 pros, so you know, you should beat everybody. It's really not that as easy as that, especially when you're playing against good sides like Scott's team.
And Paul, with probably more so for those senior pros, is there anything you've kind of put in place? I'm interested in anything either you put in place or it happens organically, in terms of, you know, say, I don't know, like a McGinn or Tiadify comes down, who's a centre back. You know, do they ever sort of provide any kind of feedback or support, or are they kind of quite open to help guide like those younger players in those positions? Is that quite fluid, or, you know, or is there things that you've maybe put in place that, you know, help aid that?
Yes, it kind of depends. Like, it's interesting. Like, if you use Tiadify as an example, who's a Kiwi who knows the league and has played in the league, he's come to the Phoenix trying to be a pro. He stepped down a few times this year to get some more minutes. He knows the league and the situation and the players, and so he slips in really easy. Whereas someone like Liam McGinn, who's come from Australia, I actually had to spend some time with Liam after a game, just kind of really explaining how the league works and kind of what the expectations are on things, just so he could kind of get up to speed with the challenge that he faces every week. So it kind of depends a little bit on the player and when they come down. But again, if they're at the right point in the process, so like this year I had Rufer once, Brandon Wilson a few times, those kind of guys, I can say to them before the game, this is my expectation of you. I need you to lead this. You control this on the pitch for me. And they would do that because the circumstance they're in is they're comfortable doing that. Whereas sometimes, like a Liam, it actually took a few games for me. I actually had to take some responsibility off him so he could concentrate on himself and concentrate on his game and improving. And then when he got more confident and was playing better, then I could say to him, right, now I want you to be more of a leader in the group. And so it just kind of depends on the situation. But in the dressing room, they're all fantastic. Ollie Sale is amazing when he comes down. He's been doing it for a number of years, so he kind of knows the situation as well. But they're all so good in the dressing room with the young players, encouraging. And I think it helps that we align the playing style, right, so that there's never any change. They just kind of fit straight into their position, know what they're doing. They've trained all week with the first team like that, so they just play the same way, and it makes it a lot easier, so don't have to worry about that. And it's more just about kind of them blending in with the younger players.
So it seems in that scenario, there's often instances, Paul, where you're having to drop players or move players down in effect. So and we talked about it a bit last week around those fringe players or those that aren't quite ready for the first team or aren't quite ready for the ISPS Premiership team. Maybe it'd be good to get some insight from you all on how you deal with those fringe players. Like how what type of conversations do you have? Do you meet them all individually? Do you explain everything in depth? Do you not explain at all? Maybe good to get some insight on how you're dealing with those fringe players or those who do have to move down. I mean, Scott, did you have many situations where that was happening this year? Did you have to have a lot of conversations around those fringe players?
Yeah, we had at Team Wellington, we had a few players that were signed and didn't get a great deal of minutes throughout the season. But it's more approaching the season as a collective. So everyone knows that you're a group. Your group has an objective. These are the steps that you need to take to get to your objective or to succeed. And then it's them understanding where they sit within the bigger picture. So sometimes it was they're in the squad, sometimes they weren't in the squad, sometimes they got 30 seconds, sometimes they didn't get anything. But the main thing was everyone was clear and understood that you were signed because you're a good player. And as a club and as a team, we now have an objective. And the objectives were to win the league or secure a spot in the OFC Champions League. So that never wavered, that never moved. Everybody understood that was the role. If players didn't agree with selections or they didn't agree with what was happening, then there's an open door policy at the training ground. So the door is always open to the office where the players can come in and talk. What's always difficult is when you are going to have these conversations with players, if they're tough conversations to have, that you were dropping them or whatnot. It was important that I moved my process around, so I didn't have a single process where I'd go to the office and then call a player in. I didn't have a scenario, the process where the training would finish and then I'd go and talk to the player. Because all that happens is the players find a different way of exiting the building, or they're kind of hanging and waiting for that conversation. So, any coach will tell you that it's always a hard conversation to have, and it's never one that coaches enjoy, and nor do the players enjoy. But at the opening of the season, objectives were there, and then it was also said that the process will be, if you perform, then you'll keep your place. If you don't perform, you'll be dropped. The other part is, this is our objective to the season. Everybody has to buy in. If you don't buy in, then you're usually the ones who don't play or form a little clique, and then you leave anyway. So I was pretty upfront around the process, pretty honest around the process, and it was never a scenario where a player didn't know if they weren't in the squad or if they weren't playing or starting or they'd been dropped. It was a very clear process of a conversation of mouth to face to face, and it came physically out of my mouth when they're looking at me.
And obviously you got a lot of players at Auckland City who I'd imagine want to be playing every single week. Name 11. How did you deal with those remaining 5 or 7 or 9 players that potentially wanted to be on there but weren't?
Yeah, I think firstly there's probably going to be a little bit of a consistent message across most teams in terms of it's a collective, and we've got an objective, and we can't do that if everyone's not invested and all of those things, and a little bit similar to Scott. Obviously we worked together before. This year I kind of tried a number of different ways. I know obviously under Ramon there was for a long time there was a set process of kind of coming as a new coach. I guess it gave me an opportunity to get to know the individuals and the personalities a little bit more, and while similar to Scott, we touched on as a team what our objectives and our goals were. I kind of outlined as a group at the start of the season that there's the performance element. If you're playing and performing well, obviously ultimately I make the decision on whether they're performing well or not. You're going to be keeping your place. health. Obviously, if you're healthy, if you're fully fit, so he's in a fortunate position this year to have, a really strong squad in my eyes. And, if players were touch and go come Saturday morning, I was quite clear around, look, we're not going to risk you. Last couple of the games of the season, we had Angel, Tom Doyle, a few guys that had knocks and niggles that, we didn't want to risk. So again, regardless of if you're the captain or you're the youngest player, I stick to that process. The third thing, which I said, was obviously tactical. There's a tactical element that comes into play. Most of the, there's a handful of games where, we feel it's going to be a real kind of tactical battle. And, there's certain characteristics and qualities that, again, what I think are going to help us in the game. And then, towards the end of the season, I guess is what we called the sort of business end, where the team maybe became a little bit more consistent. Obviously, everyone's performing, everyone's in a really good moment. We've got some momentum as a team. Some of the conversations with those fringe guys who maybe started the season was, look, at the end of the day, the fourth element is, I have to make a decision, and it's not a personal one. It's a coach's feeling. It's my feeling. It's not a case of something else. I tried to make clear of, there's not a specific thing, you need to go and work on your left foot, or you need to do this in training. Once you're kind of working your way through the levels, it becomes those, a mixture of all of those 3 to 4 things that I listed. But look, at the end of the day, I go to bed at night, I think about the team, I wake up, training, you feel different. You see things from the outside, and I took a big step this year to kind of, really kind of be around the outside and get around to as many people as I could, and allow, outside of the tactical components of the training, allow me to have full control on the rest of the time I could spend, really kind of, looking at body language, looking at how people are looking and feeling. And as Scott said, try and stay true to those processes. But, they did kind of evolve a little bit through the season. But at the end of the day, as I said, to kind of wrap up, I guess, is a fringe player or someone that's desperate to play, there's not going to be a word or a sentence that's going to make you feel better. So it's just, as I said, it's not personal. It's what I feel, that this team or this starting team is going to give us, for the upcoming game.
I feel like you just dropped me.
Yeah, so basically, Scott, unfortunately, you wouldn't tick any of those boxes at the moment, mate.
Leave meeting.
A challenging one, Paul. Can you recall any, again, it could be historical, but really challenging conversations that you've had to have, and that, have either worked out to, be a good decision, or maybe one that you regret making?
Yeah, I mean, look, every coach has those, right? Like almost weekly.
Spill the beans, Temps.
If you win and you play well, you've made the right decisions. If you lose and you play bad, you've made the wrong decisions generally. So it comes and goes. I heard a really interesting thing today from Pochettino on a podcast where they asked him this question about Spurs, and he said that he made it really clear to the players the difference between the human level and the performance level. So it was like, I'm your mentor, like we're all kind of human beings, we'll all get on, and we'll all kind of like treat each other with respect, and we'll get on like each other and on a personal level. But when it comes to a performance level, it then can't cross over, so it doesn't become personal. Like Jose mentioned that, like it's not a personal thing, it's just my decision. It's my job to make that decision. I found what Scott said really interesting around changing up the different starter things, because I had a situation this year where you normally do like a tactical session, ideally before the game, with like your starting 11, right, and what you're going to practice to play against your opponent. And so that's generally a kind of like a little bit of insight into what the coach is thinking for the starting team. And I probably made the mistake of, over a number of weeks putting the starting 11 out, and then players start to understand, like, okay, well, I'm not in the team then, like, because he's working with these players. And so I actually was purposely mixing it up, like in those sessions, to see what the responses were of the players. And I had one example where I knew I was going to start this guy in centre midfield, but I purposely put him in the second team for the last session just to see what his reaction was. And use that as a learning moment, because they're all my players are young, right? So I can kind of use that more as like a learning scenario. So I then talked to him about what his reaction was. How did he feel? Was he emotional? Did he get upset? How did he respond in training? Was that the right thing to do? How can he control his emotions better? So I can kind of try and use those as the way to educate the young players on how it works, and also see what their reactions are. I tried explaining everything to everyone, and then I had 2 weeks where me and Wilco decided that we wouldn't explain anything to anyone, and we just kept quiet, and we were purely doing it to see what everyone's responses were and who came to us to ask, who just took it on the chin, who knew themselves that they weren't quite at the level or hadn't been good enough to get into the team, and they just kind of got their head down and worked hard. It's a really interesting process to see with young players who has those kind of mental capacities to deal with the situations emotionally, and then to be able to react in the right way. And you get to really learn about your players through those scenarios. But at the start of the season, or if I get a new player, I always try and work on the principle of, look, I'm going to do whatever I feel is the right thing for you and look after you and try and help you. And I'm not a bad guy. So if I drop you, it's not because I'm doing it out of spite. It's because I feel it's the right thing to do. And I'll always try and I'll always have a reason, because I think deeply about each decision we make. So if we want to talk more about the reasons, we can. Or if you feel personally that you know that you haven't quite been at it, then that's fine. You just get your head down, and I'll give you things to kind of to improve on so that you can get into the team. So it's probably the hardest thing in coaching week to week, isn't it? Like picking the team, managing the process, managing the players, and it's a fascinating psychological dynamic every week as the week goes on towards training. I even tried telling players at the start of the week that they weren't going to play this weekend, and this was my plan for them, to get them back in and stuff, just to try and stop it from being that. Because as a coach, it almost became like on a Saturday morning, if you had a Sunday game, that was the session I was dreading the most, because I had to talk to like 6 players that they weren't going to play the next day. And so like I was kind of like maybe trying to sort of break that up as a coach as well, like in different ways. So it is really interesting. I smiled when Scott said that players sort of second guess what's going to happen next, and if you call someone into the office, they all think, oh, here we go, and all the players in the dressing room like, oh, he's been called in, he's been dropped, and it kind of becomes quite a fascinating situation. So yeah, it's very challenging.
Yeah, I guess there's like another. Not everyone's got loads of different ways of doing certain things, but then obviously when you get to a certain point in the season, when we were running, like 11v11s, 9v9s game training kind of sessions, where you'd set out 2 teams, and then you'd do it in, say, 4 or 5 minute blocks, and then after the first 5 minutes you'd say, okay, change positions. So in other words, change bibs, so forward would swap with the other forward and things like that. And it was really interesting that as a coach or as a man manager, you can gauge whether a player feels inferior to take the bib off someone in the opposition, because they know that that's probably the team that you're going to go with. Mm. So it's really interesting dynamic when I'd say that. And then there were players who weren't getting minutes, wouldn't even go over and grab the bib off the other centre back or the right wing back, because they were like, well, I'm not going to play, am I? And it gave you a really good insight into, I've got to spend more time with that player because that player's not in a good space. So yeah, everyone's got different ways. So
one of the fascinating things that we tried, because we saw this from a coach on a website as an idea, and we tried it at training for a few sessions, and I thought it was a really interesting dynamic, is we had a session where 2 teams are going up against each other, whether that's 11v11 or whether it was literally just a 3v3 or a kind of or a game training process, we would say that you had one mistake, and then on your second mistake you would change with the person that you're in direct competition against. And so in the training, it put this unbelievable sort of like extra pressure on players. Like, so we'd use possession as an idea and say, right, if you give the ball away once, that's your first warning. If you give the ball away a second time, you change with the person that you give the ball away in your position. So then they were fighting each other to press each other harder to get the bib of the team that you were coaching. And it was like you had to try and finish in the team at the end of the session. You had to try and finish in the team that I was coaching. And so there was a challenge that if you lost your bib, you might not get it back for 15 minutes if someone kept the ball. So you had this real kind of pressure on yourself to try and perform at training. And it was a real interesting dynamic. And I really liked kind of what that brought to the sessions. It's not something you'd maybe do every session, but it was certainly something that helped us identify who were the players that really wanted to earn the shirt, so to speak, and then those that kind of weren't quite ready for the pressure.
So that was that like an 11v11 and ended up like a 4v2.
Yeah, that's it.
A last question for the group to finish off this one. Obviously, everybody here is keen to better themselves and make themselves a more effective coach, certainly in the area of player management. What area have you particularly identified that you want to spend a bit more time to learn about, or what would be your blind spot, or what advice has somebody given you to look into more? Like what would be the main area you think in terms of player management that I need to do better in this? We'll start off, maybe you kick us off for that one.
Well, for me, young players, what I've noticed and what I feel like is hard when you're coaching young players is the generation that you're coaching. They don't show a huge amount of gratitude. Like, so if you help them, or if you improve them, or you do something for them, you don't get an instant kind of reaction as you would with maybe a more mature kind of adult who knows that, oh, look, the coach has helped me out there, or I maybe deserve to get dropped, but he's backed me there, so like I owe him one. And you kind of have that with senior players, you get that, whereas young players, they don't quite know that yet, and so you don't get this kind of gratification or this kind of like, oh, thanks. So you actually have to kind of almost be really unselfish in the fact that I know I'm helping you, I know you don't know yet, but you will later on. And I've found that as the season goes on, or as seasons go on, like almost sometimes when the players leave the academy and go elsewhere or progress into the first team, then they actually come back and they almost kind of thank you then. And it's quite an interesting thing. And I feel that's something as a coach is really a difficult thing to manage, because if you don't get that kind of instant reaction from somebody or a connection with somebody, that it is quite difficult to kind of keep giving, so like that's probably for me the biggest challenge, is to like keep giving, to keep helping, to keep improve, knowing that I'm probably not going to get anything back immediately. And the generation that we're dealing with young players are just not that way inclined generally. There's always exceptions to the rule, of course, and I think that for me is like what I want to keep working on, is understanding the generation that I coach and digging real deep into kind of how that generation works and how they learn, how they interact with you, and to keep pushing those kind of boundaries. Because I say at the start of the season to everyone, if you want to know what to improve on, come and talk to me. And it happens every single cycle. Like the first 10, 15 people, it's all text messages. So they text me, what do I need to work on? What do I need to do? And I will say to them, come back and have a conversation with me tomorrow, like face to face. And it's almost like I'm having to kind of teach them these kind of communication skills and values. And I don't think you kind of get that as much of senior players. They almost want to talk to you face to face, don't they? Whereas young players would normally like hide behind the technology or do it in a different way. So really understanding the generation that you coach, really understanding kind of how they operate individually, but also what you can do to kind of improve those areas with young players, I think for me is where I want to keep improving.
Well, thanks, Paul. Scotty, what sort of things spring to mind for you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because when you go through your coaching, badges. There's a lot of in the first part, it's more about understanding your players' characteristics and how you meet their needs and get to know the player. And it's in the ISPS Handle Premiership with Team Wellington, you do have an opportunity where you can form connections with your players. And it's interesting, Pochettino having the line drawn where it's I was going to jump in, but I didn't want to ruin Temps's flow. But it's like, say, how do you do that? How do you have that personable approach? But then also, that player knows deep down that you will choose whether they're in that 1 to 11. They know. So how do you not blur the line, so to speak? And I went into, obviously, this season with just one hard, fast rule, and it was, Scott, just tell the truth. Just tell the truth. If you're dropping a player, tell them why you're dropping the player. If they want to talk to you and they want your honest opinion, give them your honest opinion. Don't flake it. Don't fluff it. Tell them what you think and the reasons why. And that's something that I'll follow through with me for the rest of my coaching days. Will always be as how hard it's going to be for that player to hear it, or how much sleep you don't get, or how much you don't sleep. That player will be better off if you just tell them the truth rather than fluffing it and making it sound pretty. Whereas that when they walk out the door, if you're dealing with a younger player, a player who's aspiring to be a pro, a National League player throughout, a pro dropping down, tell the person the truth. And that's something that I'll continue to do.
Can I just ask you, like, do you get situations where what you think they know and what they believe to be the case is completely at different ends of the scale? Because generally as a coach, you kind of think, right, I'm going to like take this player out of the team, didn't play very well last week. So your expectation is he knows he didn't play very well last week. Do you ever get the kind of complete opposite where you think it's kind of an obvious call when they think, like, what are you doing? Like, I don't understand. And then you've kind of got to bridge the gap.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's only so much you can bridge the gap before you turn it into, right, now it's become emotional. Now it's become personal. And like we said before, to the player, if you don't have blurred lines, it's personal, which is always the difficulty with the spectrum on where you sit or how you flow across the spectrum. And that could be from their personality traits. They're more of a player that you've got to put your arm around, which is what we always hear. You've got to put your arm around him, you've got to look after him. Whereas some players, they prefer the opposite. But I've definitely had situations where I've literally looked at the player and gone, really? And they've looked at me and gone, really? And then you're like, right, okay. And then the brutality has to come when you're not going to get any further, where it's agree to disagree, I choose the team, you dropped. And at the end of the day, that's where it always comes down to. But it's you as a person or your personality with that player, where when you decide that you're going to say, I've made the call, that's it.
Yeah, and I guess for me, to answer your question, Dylan, is a mixture of what both these guys have been saying. And I think it's knowing the importance of knowing the players, them as people, and what their personalities are. We did some work this year around, like, we called it values in action. So what's our values as a team? Well, the values of our team, obviously we have a number of individuals. So surely our values as a team need to reflect what, you know, my personal beliefs are as a person. You know, what, you know, whoever, you know, Angel or whatever. So I think once you get a good understanding of that, then how you communicate that, for me, you know, knowing, well, Zachary Scott, he prefers, you know, just a message, you know, or he completely understands. He's a good self analyst, doesn't need to be told, or it's just a very short conversation. You know, others, it is the arm around the shoulder, a little bit more, you know, personal, in terms of personal, like, contact. But yeah, absolutely, I think that area for me, in terms of managing those fringe guys, knowing them better as people, which hopefully, you know, after a season, a second season, and so forth, you know, you'll build. But yeah, look, I think, as the guys have said, there's not a, and you could probably ask every coach now, there's probably not a perfect, you know, golden sentence or golden rule for every player, because everyone's different. Like, everybody's different. And yeah, as much as those conversations become awkward, you know, I like what Scott said, and probably subconsciously something I like to be is, look, if I'm honest and I tell them, I think I said earlier, look, the fourth part is, look, guys, it's a feeling. This is what I feel. I picked the team. Hey, look, you know, that's it. So yeah, I think it's, you know, it's an ever evolving area of coaching that, you know, one can keep improving on.
Nice. And yeah, just want to thank you all again for sharing a lot of those stories. It's obvious that, you know, you've had some deep experiences across managing players, you know, across that spectrum, if you like, of, you know, the pros and the young aspiring people. And I think certainly the stories that you've shared, you know, there's lots of stuff there that, you know, coaches and people that work in the sports industry can take around managing people, because, you know, as we all know, you know, sport is a people business. You're involved in collective team sports. So to get this right, I think is really important. So again, just thank you all for your time this evening. And again, we'll do this again soon, and we'll explore some of these things in real detail. But yeah, just want to thank all our listeners. Thank you for tuning in to the Playing Field. And yeah, we'll see everybody soon for another episode. But thank you again, team, and we'll see you soon.